Okay, so this webinar, it's going to be all about the triggers functionality, which is a new feature inside of Apptivo. It's a part of building out workflows inside of the system. And really, that's what business software is all about. Of course, it's great to index your data, be able to search and just have it centrally stored and shareable. But a big part of it is helping you to automate your business processes. And that's where workflow comes into play. So triggers are a main core component of workflow. Although I'm going to give you a little bit of just kind of context for what is a trigger and how does it fit into the greater Apptivo feature set. So as far as what we'll cover for today, we'll start about talking about what types of workflows are available, and then how do triggers fit into them, and what is a trigger, what makes up a trigger. So then we'll walk through actual common examples of what triggers you might go and build in your business, because I mean really limitless options of how it applies to different industries and sizes of organization. And then we'll just break down in general, what are the types of triggers, what is included inside of each trigger, what are the general features of it. And then we'll actually go through and just together we'll build out a few of the examples that we want to run through to give you a feel for how you go about configuring. And at the end, hopefully you got some good examples and you can go and build out the appropriate workflows for your business. All right. So when we're talking about workflow in general, it's the ability for the system to execute your business rules without you actually doing anything. So being able to go in there and then spend a little bit of time configuring the system now, so then the system will operate how you want to moving forward. And if we go and just at a very high level breakdown what types of workflow are available, we're going to be looking at two areas, of which there's just standard features inside of Apptivo that have been around, some pretty recently and some for a long time. And then there's these brand new, more generic features which allow you to really do anything you want. It's going to take a little bit more tech savvy and know-how, but as long as you're able to go in there and kind of think the process through, you'll be able to do just about anything that you might want with the system. So you might be familiar with some of these standard features already, like the ability to convert between applications. That's one of the big workflow items in Apptivo that doesn't really exist elsewhere, is because you can take a lead and then convert it into a deal and then convert to an estimate, convert to a project, and all the way throughout the process. There's a natural workflow where certain activities are held inside of each of the apps. But then within the apps, there's also a lot of other just little minute workflow items, where these are actually things that you could do now with the triggers feature. And we're actually going to go show you some replacements or ways to go do more customized approaches to these. But there's the concept of the service level agreements, or SLAs, from the help desk or the cases app. And that's been around for a while. It allows you to go write a rule that says, hey, if a case hasn't been updated, then go move it to this stage or something like that. And then there's the reminders inside of estimates and invoices. So writing a rule that says, if it's been more than 4 days since my invoice went overdue, please send the customer an email. Then there's different approval configurations for both timesheets and projects, and also the new expense reports. And then there's been email notifications around for quite some time, and the brand new accounting rules system. So these are just native features, but really they allow you to perform one specific set of actions within the bounds of that feature. But when it comes to the custom configuration, there's only a couple actions you can perform, but you're writing your own custom criteria and actions of things that you want to happen. So we're only going to really talk about triggers today. We're just kind of talking about all the other relating features because they do all kind of plug together when it comes out to building your solution. But the other big one that I do want to talk about is the field dependencies. This isn't even a feature within itself. This is just the ability where when you're configuring the fields inside of each app, our trigger is going to be able to go and change values of those fields automatically based on the workflow you want. But even within the field dependencies, we're going to be able to guide our users through. So when they fill in the first field on a form, it can automatically go and hide and remove fields down below or change the values inside of them. That helps you go and enforce your business process, which is, okay, well, I select that a deal is from a certain industry or it's of a certain size. So if I know that a deal is for a client who has more than 200 employees, I might want to change the values later down the form. So this is types of workflow that you'll be able to implement even at a very basic level. And then the triggers come down to getting a little bit more advanced. So we'll go ahead and we'll stop with the high level items right there. Just have a quick little screenshot to show what the SLA looks like, because the SLA is the closest thing to the generic triggers feature that we've had available for a while. But let's go ahead and let's dive into what is a trigger, what are the components of it, and how do we go about using them. All right, so when we talk about triggers, it can be pretty generically be captured into one feature, but there's actually 3 different types of triggers, and each of them will have their different uses. So we have event-based, time-based, and activity-based triggers. Event-based and activity-based are very similar to each other. The only difference is event-based is when you update a record, like changing any sort of value on a field or creating a brand new record at the time. Then it will run through and check out the trigger criteria and see if it wants to perform an action. The activity base is going to be expanded, but right now it just detects when an email comes in. So the example here is, well, you just received an email response to a quote you sent them from the Opportunities app, and you want to change a value on the opportunities so it goes into a different queue, and maybe you want to send a special email notification to like the owner of that deal or even the manager of the group because it's of a certain value. So there's all these little nuances that you can put into the business rules that you're writing when you're creating a trigger that'll really affect how it actually operates. So event-based and activity-based, same thing. And then a time-based trigger is a little bit different, where you can just have a rule that checks all of your data every morning, and it looks for certain conditions. So an example of this, which we'll see in a moment, would be I'm looking through all of my deals, and I want to look for any deals that are currently have a quote outstanding, and then I want to just go and notify somebody whenever there's a deal where a quote's been sitting around for too long. So when you're looking at triggers, you've got these 3 main types. They're currently only inside of the CRM apps, so they are a V6 feature. You will be getting them rolled into every single application out there. So the invoices is getting moved into V6. Then it will receive triggers shortly after. So the triggers, they work generically, meaning any features you see in one app, they're going to work the same across each one of the apps. And as of right now, triggers are restricted to the enterprise plan, although in the short term, you'll be hearing more news about triggers becoming available across all of the different plans. All right. So we've talked about kind of what a trigger is. Let's go through a little bit of just what triggers are going to be used for. So before we start talking about how to configure them and such and what a trigger looks like in Apptivo, here are just some sample purposes. So really, there's no specific rules on what a trigger can or cannot do. This is just kind of 6 guideline areas that help you think about what a trigger could be used for. But really, it's completely up to you as far as the processes that you want to run. But I'll just go ahead, let's skim through these 6 right here. And then we'll actually hop in and I'll go show you some of these in a little bit. Okay, so the first group, special event notifications. This is probably the most commonly implemented one. And this is just when a certain activity occurs, you want to get notified about it. So this would apply like, okay, you've got an extra large deal that just came into the pipeline. So as a manager, you want to know about it. Or maybe if there's a larger deal in the pipeline, you want to repeatedly notify and keep on top of the salesperson managing it to ensure that they give it more attention than any other deals. Another example would be like you have cases coming into your help desk system, and based on the priority of them or based on how long it's been open, anything like that, then you want to go and notify a person that like a new ticket's come in. Then automated assignments is also a very popular usage. And this is really when any record comes in, based on some rules, you want to go and assign it to somebody. So this is really popular in a sales environment where you have a bunch of leads coming in, and you want the system to automatically go and assign them to people based on the geographic territory that the lead belongs to. So you can do geographic territory, but really with the criteria rules that you'll see in Apptivo, you could go write that based on any attribute that you have stored in the system. So you've got that, and then stale record alerts. These are another like really common, just generic thing that people can implement. So right here, we've got the 2 examples of if the opportunity hasn't been updated, notify the owner of it. If a high priority ticket has not been updated, but really you can notify anybody. So one of the cool things is in the example of like I have a help desk ticket or a quote, is there's already actually a feature built into our quote system, the reminders. So we talked about that being one of the standard features. You can actually write a trigger that does the same functionality as that, let's say inside of the Opportunities app. So there's certain people who aren't using the estimates app in Apptivo, but they do use opportunities. So you could write a stale record alert that will notify the customer when you moved a deal to the opportunity stage, but it hasn't been updated in the last 5 days. So you want to do multiple actions and you want to send one email to the customer and you want to send one email to the owner of that deal. So that can all be packaged into one bunch of different scenarios where you might want to get notified about something happening over time. Like let's just say you haven't spoken to a contact in the last 12 months. Maybe that's a scenario where you'd like to get a notification to log in and then go follow up with them. So those definitely make up the majority of triggers. They're very simple and quick to implement, very effective. Then these last three, these are getting a little bit more advanced where you're piecing together a couple different features inside of the system, but it really will start to give you a feel for what you can do. So we're not going to cover these in too much detail during today, just for the sake of time, but we'll definitely kind of talk about what the possibilities are, and then we're going through and configuring. You'll see how they would start to piece together. So custom approval workflows, really there's a lot of different combinations here. There are some basic approvals already available, like in the timesheets application and expense reports as native features, but there's also some really cool things that you can do as far as just writing in your own workflows. So one very simple example would just be that when a deal is of a certain value, before a salesperson is allowed to go and send it out to the customer, we want to have a manager go and review the quote and give it their okay. And what we want to do is set up really a slew of features, like to make sure that only the manager can perform these steps and that there's no way for the sales rep to actually go and move that deal to the next step. So one of the features that we'll be using is triggers to go and send automatic notifications and to automatically change values when somebody says something is approved or rejected. But yeah, really it all just centers around putting together a few features and figuring out what your business workflow is. So you can do that where you go and get approval before moving a quote out. Or another example would be like, I'm going to resolve a case, and maybe anytime a high priority case was resolved, before it actually goes into closed state, we want to have the manager review it and just give their sign off. So in that case, we can go through and there can just be a notification that goes to the manager automatically, and then one more notification to the support person who worked on the case once it's finally resolved. So lots of different approval workflows are very similar kind of handoffs of deals, people kind of giving their check off for their review. And then there's also just a general item of flagging data for reports and queues. So what I mean by this is there are really some advanced things that you can do. So we're talking about updating the fields on a record. There's actually a way to update the fields on a related record. So for example, when a new case is recorded for a customer, you write a trigger that goes and updates a field on the customer that indicates they have at least one active ticket against them. So then what you can do is you can have a report inside of the customer's application that shows you every customer who currently has an open ticket against them. So there's all these different little tricks that you can do as far as changing values on a record that then enables it to show up inside of some custom view that you've generated elsewhere, allows you to pull it out into like an automated report that gets delivered out. But it's basically just using the trigger to set an attribute, and then you use the other reports and views in order to find your data that has been affected by that trigger. So one example of that would be when we first move it to the quote stage, we can take the current date and set it into another field. So that way, even if you have to send out 20 different quotes, you'd be able to see the date that the very first quote was sent out to the user. And then I could also go pull a report of all my opportunities that have had quotes. So we'll definitely show that example. And then you can check cases. So maybe if you're checking efficiency of your support team, you want to indicate when a case was closed on the first day that it was created. So you could write a trigger when every case is marked as closed, and then detect if the creation date is the same as today. And if so, go and flag off that ticket so it can get pulled into that report of first day resolution. So lots of different things that you can do there, setting values to be going to go and capture later inside of your reports. And then the last piece is just basically doing things on behalf of your users. So even the little things matter when it comes to this, where one really popular example is just sometimes based on one or two fields that you fill in, you know the next 3 or 4 values that need to be filled in by the customer. So, or you know that certain values will not ever apply. So that's the example where you're inputting a deal and it's of a certain number of employees. And you know that deals of that employee count, they can only be of these 3 or 4 types. So based on that, you go through and you automatically fill in the next values for them. Yep. So that's one example. Then the other one would be, let's say if you are actually going through and you want the user to be able to very quickly put in a sales lead with just 1 or 2 details, like, okay, which form did it come from off of the website, and then what is like their name and their email. And then maybe based on the form that it came from on the website, you automatically know 3 or 4 other details, like the campaign that you ran, what type of customer it is, what industry they're in, what region they're in, things like that. So you could have a trigger just detect the source, that the one field that was entered by the web form or by the employee. And then based on the source, the trigger would go and populate 7 other fields that you might use for a whole different slew of reporting purposes. Okay, so lots of different options when it comes to triggers. When I look at it, I kind of break them down into those 6 natural categories. So let's go ahead, let's move into the next step and talk about the components of a trigger. So how do we go about and implement all these different types of scenarios that we're talking about? So we already talked about the 3 different types of triggers, but even across the 3 types, they follow a common structure where there are some slight variations. I'll hop into the app and we'll show you them in a moment. But when it comes down to what a trigger is created of, there's a couple high-level pieces of information. So you name each trigger. So in this example that we've got up on the screen, this is the one we spoke about a moment ago, where the very first time that I move a deal to my proposal price quote stage, I want to kind of timestamp it with today's date and then indicate that this deal has gone to a quote before. So on top, I will name it, say, okay, set date first quoted. You'll define the event, or in the case of like a time-based trigger, you'll define the frequency right here. So I'm saying that this should be checked whenever an opportunity is updated, whenever somebody changes a field value. And well, also whether it's enabled or disabled. So you can create a rule and then temporarily disable it, or disable when you think something's not working right. What it just means is that the rule won't be run, but it's not deleted from the system. So you got those high-level details, and then the meat of it comes down inside of the criteria, the second section in the middle. So this determines when the event actually runs, because really the key thing that you're doing with the trigger is you're trying to define what this event is. So you're going to define when this trigger should be run, and when your event conditions are met or your criteria is met, then what action should the system perform for you? So right here, we're going to go through and we're going to compare the field values, which we're going to talk a little bit more detail about, like how you go and set these up properly so they work, and then what's going to actually happen at the end. So you just have a couple generic actions available here, but it comes down to being able to update values or send emails out of the system. So when we look at which actions are supported, you can do as many actions as you want when inside of one trigger. So you basically say, in the event of X, I want to perform these 7 actions. You can go and do that. And then you just go one by one, add each action. So you'd say that, okay, I want to update my attribute of date first quoted, and then I'm going to set that to now. So that's right here, create trigger action of update attribute. And then it knows that you've selected a date field, because that's how you've configured that in the system. So it'll give the option of either just picking a date right now instead of the rule, or you can use a system variable. So in that case, whenever somebody updates the opportunity to the proposal price quote stage, it'll automatically set that date into this field. The other example is I just made one field called received quote to yes. And if we go back to the previous step, let's go down into a little bit more detail of why it was configured this way. Or actually what we'll do is we'll hop in, I'm going to show you inside of the application. So this was a rule that we had written inside of the Opportunities app. So in order to get to view the triggers, basically each app has its own triggers. So that's why when you're looking at the trigger or trigger criteria and actions, it's always going to be referencing the fields. So those will be the fields on the record inside of this app. So in opportunities, I click up here to go to settings, and triggers are located underneath the name of the app inside of the settings menu. So down at the bottom of opportunities, you'll see triggers, and then you'll see my 3 different types of triggers. So this particular one is an event-based trigger. You see right here I have set date first quoted. And then inside of this trigger, this is exactly what we were just seeing in the screenshot a moment ago. So inside of this criteria section, I've got 2 different sets of criteria. So if we think about like what this rule is, it is first checking that the sales stage has been moved into the proposal price quote. So you'll see when you're writing a trigger upon updating a record, you'll have this old and new option right here. And this is really important. So what this says is whenever the trigger executes, you're going to have 2 versions of the opportunity in this case. So you'll have all of the old field values from before it was saved, and then all the new field values of what it was just saved to. So that way you can tell if a field has changed in this update or whether it was already set to that value. So what you're doing here is you're saying the old sales stage was anything but proposal price quote, and the new sales stage was proposal price quote. So I'm confirming that it is when this update occurred, they specifically changed the stage to proposal price quote. So that would confirm that yes, I've moved to this stage, but then we also only want to run this trigger if it's the first time that I've given the quote. So down below where we saw that we updated the attribute received quote yes, the whole purpose of having that attribute there is so we can write this second piece of criteria. So we say that yes, it has to be moved into proposal price quote, and the received quote cannot be set to yes. So the way that we structured this rule was that if I detect that this attribute has not been set to yes, I can proceed the first time. So the first time I moved to proposal price quote, it would go and then it would set that received quote to yes. So that just ensures that after the first time this trigger is run, it would never run again. So it would put the one example of the timestamp in here. It would set that attribute. So later on, I can go filter by all opportunities where they have received a quote at least one time, rather than if they're just in that stage. And then I can also go and get the date that the first quote was sent out, and it would never get overwritten. So 3 main sections of a trigger. You got your basic details, your criteria, and your actions. All right, so we just kind of walked through one of the examples. What we're going to do with the rest of the session is really just start diving through all of these. So I've just nominated a few examples right here that I think kind of demonstrate what we're looking to do. It'll give you a good feel for triggers without boring you all to death. So what we'll do is we'll run through each one of these real quickly. I'll show you how some of them work end to end. We'll just kind of show you how some are configured, but the idea is that let's just give you a taste for how to go through and set these up from scratch. All right, so let's start off with the first one, which is when a high priority case is raised, notify the support manager. So when you start to think about, I want to put a rule in place, you always start off with just a really basic description of, well, what do you want to happen? So I just wrote out a slightly longer description to say whenever a case is created or if it's updated and the priority gets set to high, in that scenario, I want to notify the support manager, and her name is Lori. So this is like my business rule that I want to implement. Now, this is going to be an event-based trigger because I'm saying that whenever the case is either created brand new or updated, I want to look for an attribute value. So it's event-based. And then because this trigger could happen when I'm first raising a case, because I could create it with high priority, or it could happen if I'm reviewing one and then change it to high priority. So I need to write one trigger on creation and one trigger on update, although they're pretty much the same trigger. So when we look at like what we're actually going to define here, I'm going to have the same exact thing, but the event is update for this, create for this. And then just like before, you're saying if the old priority was anything but high and the new one is high, meaning I've just changed the priority, then the action I want to do is I'm just going to send an email. So you'll have a predefined set of templates inside of the system. So this is kind of, once again, plugging features together. And then you're going to send that email to Lori. So we're just going to do the same exact action in the second scenario. Just a matter of kind of copying the rule that we did before. So let's go ahead and let's go implement this set of triggers. All right, so this one would apply over inside of the Cases app, but really, although I'm using some specific examples here, these can be applied in a bunch of different ways. They could apply to any application that comes in. So just as I'm writing a trigger right now that detects the priority of a case, I could be looking at the priority of a lead. I could be looking at the amount of money that a lead is worth, anything like that. So we're going to hop into triggers. And these are going to be event-based triggers. So I've got nothing in here, nice fresh set. And now we'll go type in the details. So this first one is going to be to notify on high priority cases. And what I'm going to do is mute my microphone for just a moment while I type in some values here. Okay, so first I named it, and then in this case, I'm going to write one rule for creation. I realized I actually made a slight mistake when I was defining it. So when you're writing a rule that's on creation, you'll notice there's no new and old values because you're not changing anything existing. So all I'm saying is if the new value is set to high, then perform my action. So one thing I want to demonstrate here is really like there's nothing that'll happen here. It's just a little bit of a time-saving technique. But we went through and we built out the criteria of, well, not old priority, just new priority equals high. So then our action is going to be send email template, high priority case notification. So in this scenario, you might already have the email template in there. So when I click add action, I hit send email. But you'll notice I have no email templates. So little time-saving tip is to create all your email templates ahead of time, because otherwise you'll get stuck in this scenario where I want to create an action, but I can't actually do anything. So we're going to put a little bit of a temporary action in here just so we can save it. Oops, sorry. Yeah, the sets and groups you see right here, this doesn't really matter when you have very simple triggers like this, but when you get into really complicated sets of criteria, what will happen is it just allows you to name what each set is trying to check cases for, and it makes it really easy to figure out like where your logic exists when you have 20 different groups of criteria. Okay, so I'm just saving that trigger real fast, and we need to go create that email notification. So we said high priority case notification. So hop into email, we'll go create an email template. Each trigger will just show whatever email templates are available inside of that application. So once again, I'm just going to talk my mic on mute for half a moment while I type in some sample information. Okay, so obviously you'd want to put a little bit more detail in here, but I'll come through, I'll write out my email template, and then some cool little flags down here where you'll see available in notes, available for compose email. A lot of the time you want an email only to be available for these automated notifications that you're writing in triggers. So what you can do is you can toggle them off, and that way I'll still be able to go and select this template when I write my trigger, but then it won't appear for our users like when they're sending general communications from the system. So just allows you to segment those. And then we want to hop back in. It looks like maybe I moved before my trigger saved. So this one was notify manager on high priority case. Okay, and we're just going to do S1, G1. And we're saying if the new priority is high, then send email high priority case notification. And then you'll see you can select the from and the CC, just if you want to like CC some central address. So I could just do this since I'm notifying internally. I could do like alerts at my domain. Doesn't really matter. And then trigger 2, you're going to get 3 options: attribute, employee, team. So team and employee are directly from inside of Apptivo. That's just search for an employee. And then also the teams can have emails. So it would just send an email to that central team email, and then hopefully that notifies everybody. And then the attribute would be like I could notify the contact or the owner, the current assignee of the ticket. So in this case, I'm just trying to notify Lori every single time. So I'm just going to say notify employee. And then I would come and get Lori right here. So with that, I've created my first trigger. And then I just want to come back in and I go and create my second one. So it'd be exactly the same thing. I come through, I do updated, same stuff. I go into high priority and all that. Okay, so that would be the first trigger in action. Where's my slideshow here? Then automated assignment, it's really very much the same thing. So although it performs a completely different purpose, the information you're going to be performing is the same. So in this case, once again, I'm going to be doing two different events. So when a case comes in, assign it to a rep based on the type of issue. So in this case, there's a bunch of different types. So I'll show you that list in a second. And then if one of these two values is selected, then I want to assign to a marketing manager. If not, I want to go to another person. So what I'll do is I'll write one rule for each scenario, and then the action will be to assign to that person. So this Edna Jones, this would be, the support manager, and then Lori would be playing the role of the marketing manager. So what I do is I write a group that includes these two, so an or condition, and then I do the action, and in this case, I just do it does not equal both of those, so and condition. Okay, so in that case, once again, I'm going to hop in. Whoops. And then the way you would do that is, so it'd say if it's on update, then, it's on creation only. So if the new type equals, so you see here's all the different values. So if I say it's feedback, and then I don't want to do that because that's going to be an and match. So this is where I would do two different groups. So I could go and call this one feedback. And this one's partnerships. So I'm saying if it's either one of these, then my action is to update the attribute. And when I'm updating the attribute, I would select assign to, and then I'd come through and I'd pick the person. So pretty standard. It's really the same concept, just applied in a different way. Then let's go ahead and let's take a look at this last one. All right. So, this is not the last one. Two more. So this is a time-based trigger. So stale record alerts. This one's really common. Just kind of helps the system give you a little bit of a prodding whenever you need to go and reach out to sales contacts or anything like that. So this one example is when an opportunity is in the quote stage, but it hasn't been updated in the last 2 days. I just want to notify that sales rep. So then they go and they follow up on it. So in this case, I'm only going to need one trigger, although you might want to have a bunch of different scenarios. So potentially I create 6 different triggers because one of them is 2 days if it's in the quote stage. And then if it's in the initial stage, I only want to follow up once every 30 days. And if it's on hold, I want to follow up once every year. So in that case, I might want to write one trigger for each one of these conditions. So then in this case, the actual rule that you're implementing is every morning you want to check for all the opportunities. You're going to look for only the ones in the quote stage. And then if their update date is more than 2 days ago, I want to send an email to whoever owns it. So in the case of a time-based trigger, there's something called the frequency. So here I can say daily at 9 a.m. is when I want this trigger to run. The criteria is going to be only applying to the deals in the stage of proposal price quote. And then the action is going to be to send the email template of stale quote alert to the owner. So we hop into that. That would be over in the opportunities application. All right, so we're going to go time-based. Okay, so then here, we're just going to call this stale quote. So once again, I'll mute my mic. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to run on a recurring basis. So we'll do this every single day at 9 in the morning. And then what we're writing it for is only for deals in proposal price quote. So that is sales stage equals proposal price quote. And then the action that I want to perform. It's proposal price quote and also not the modified date is modified date over 30 days ago. So what we'll do is if the modified on is greater than 30 days ago, or in this case, I'll just do that date right there, then that would switch for me. And then I'd come and I'd do my action. Oops. Sorry. In the case of a date field, I actually made a mistake right there. So this would do an explicit date. So this would not be exactly what I wanted 2 days ago. So sometimes you do want to write a trigger based on like one particular date. Like you might have a one-time trigger to go update things. But in this case, you'll see when you select the date field, you can do like before, in the last, in the next, etc. So in this case, I would do in the last, and then I can do 2 days. Okay, so then that would set up my criteria appropriately, and then the action that I want to perform. So in this case, I'm going to go and I'm going to send an email to the owner of the deal. So I could select a from or a CC address, just controls how the system sends the email. And then I've got this email template friendly quote reminder, just like we should have done before. I should have already created my email template for stale quote alert. I'm just going to reuse the friendly quote reminder instead. And then the trigger 2, what I'll use is an attribute this time, because based on whoever owns this deal, I want to notify them. So I can't just select an employee because this will ask me to pick one person. So I do attribute, and then it will show the different attributes where we have an email address. So the customer and the contact, of course, to send an outside email, or the assigned to is going to be one of our employees. So we go like that. We save it away, and then that would just automatically begin executing immediately. And if you ever did want to disable it, you just come and disable it right here, and then it would stop firing after that. So I guess what we can do is we can take a quick little moment and show you what has been performed so far. So in this case, I believe we just had that one in there. Let's see. If not, then we'll go and start into the last example, which is our more complicated one of fusing a bunch together, and we'll show you that. So this is just updating the attributes. Okay, perfect. So we'll demonstrate this one. So we've got this in there. What will happen is once it's enabled, it immediately applies to every opportunity. So it's going to run and hit any opportunity that meets this criteria. But because it's only happening when updating, it's not like it goes and checks opportunities for their previous updates. When I enable this, it only applies to every update performed from here on out. So in this case, what will happen is I'll come in. We're just going to type in some gibberish right there. Just get enough fields so we can submit our opportunity. And we'll go ahead and submit it. So as of now, nothing's happened. Remember, we're looking at the dates first quoted and then on the received quote. So it's set to no, date first quoted is nothing. But what'll happen is when I come in and I swap it over to proposal price quote, yeah, sometimes this takes a moment to run in there. Then it would go and just populate the date first quoted and receive quote to yes based on our rule. So yeah, I don't really know if we want to wait for that. So it says old sales stage, new sales stage, and the received quote does not equal yes. Okay, so yeah, instead of waiting for that, actually, just noticed the time. So let's go ahead and let's hop into the last example and just talk through it a little bit, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up this session. So the last example I want to talk about is bringing in a couple different angles. So this is like a custom approval workflow. This is just one way to demonstrate how I can start to put together multiple triggers to push together a longer process. So in this example, I wrote triggers required 2, it's told you triggers required 3. This would be a simple one-step approval workflow. Where before I'm able to move a deal to the quote stage, I want to go and request approval from the sales manager. And maybe what you want to do here is actually only apply to deals of a certain size. So maybe what you want to do is if a deal is worth more than $10,000, before I issue a quote for it, I want to get approval from the manager. So in this case, there's a couple different things that you're going to put into place. So you could do a very basic flow and simply have the person request it and not prevent them from proceeding to like the proposal stage. There are some other features directly inside of the app. So like one of the standard workflow features inside of the Opportunities app is going to be the sales cycle. So what this allows you to do is for each one of your stages, you can say that there's criteria. So what I can actually do is write criteria of when you're allowed to enter and exit each one of these stages. So inside of the proposal price quote stage, I could come and I could write criteria to enter it as saying that if the value is over a certain amount, so if the amount is greater than 10,000 and so basically, if my amount is greater than 10,000 and my approval is set to yes. So in this case, I would need to create the approval fields. So what you'll basically need is you would need a field that says whether it's been approved. So in my criteria right here, my entry criteria, I can say that if it's greater than value, then I must have the entry or the quote approved to proceed. Then there's the process of, well, we have to have the fields in there that say whether the quote was approved or not. Then we have to protect it so that can only be approved by a manager or the appropriate person. And then we also have to have a method to allow the employee to submit it for approval and to notify both the manager and the employee when it gets approved or rejected so they can take the next step. So quite a few things to built in right here. Let's go ahead and let's just go quickly whip them out. So to start off with, what we'll need is we'll need field to say, hey, this quote has, what status is it in? Has it been approved? Has it been submitted? Does it need it at all? Then there is the field that says if it has been approved. So this is something that only the manager could go and modify. And then we need to go write the rules that notify each person throughout. So what I can actually do here is maybe I create like a fresh section called approvals. And then we'll go and create a couple fields in here. So maybe I'll do first a drop down. I'll call this approval status. And we'll say either it's not required, it's requested, rejected, or approved. So first you have that, then anybody can modify the approval status, so I could go request it. But then you can have whether it's approved or not. And this one could just be set to yes or no. But then here I could go apply a functional security. And I could say that anybody can view it, but in order to create or modify it, you have to have a special privilege. So that way I can restrict it to only my managers. So I've got my fields in there. Now I can come through and I could say, well, in order to enter the proposal stage, then I need to ensure that well, we'll just leave the amount out of this for right now. And we could say that your approval status is set to, I'll use the other field that's restricted, but quote approved must be set to yes. And then what I could do to add in our amount there is I could say if the amount is greater than 10K. And then what I do is I do a group. So I'd say either both of these have to be true or just the amount can be less than 10K. And then either one of those scenarios, I would allow them to enter. So then the next step would just be to write triggers to notify each step of the way. So I'd do quote submitted, like quote submitted for approval. And then I'd do old approval status is, whoops. So what I'd do is I'd write a rule that says if it was moved to requested, send an email. And I'd say, okay, approval requested. And then this is where I'd come in and I'd go select the manager. And what I'd do is I'd write those 3 triggers just like this. So 1 to request the approval, 1 to mark it as rejected, and 1 to mark it as approved. Then that would go ahead and that would wrap up our process. So that's going to end it for today's session. So thank you everybody for attending. Hope you found this useful, and definitely let us know if you have any further suggestions about the triggers feature over on our blog. So thanks very much, and we'll catch you next time.